Let's do the dang thing. What is up, everybody? We are live here at MythVision. It's 12:30 noon on the East Coast, North Kakalaki, down in Vietnam. That's where I live. What's up, Dr. Kipp? How you doing?
What's up? It's good. How are you?
Doing good. Hold on, I got a delay echo here. Let me
fix
this.
You do.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
So
is that better?
that is, but for some reason I have. Oh, that's it. Okay. No, that was surprising. It's because I've got the show on a different browser, and an ad started, and so there was all this noise in my head, and I was like, oh, it's Yahweh.
Well, I must start off with just saying there is this interesting story, and we're about to do our intro, but it always perplexed me because I wondered, like, why did God kill this guy? I mean, like, he killed this guy. The guy pulls out, he spills his seed on the ground, boom, dead. I guess that's a way to start our intro. Here we go. Let's do it.
That's a good.
Back in Washington, Kipp Davis is getting his first look at a final prized fragment in the Museum of the Bible's collection.
This is a fragment that contains text from Genesis chapter 32, and it's supposedly from the 1st century BC or the 1st century CE.
Dr. Kill is joining us today here at MythVision Podcast. We are MythVision, and welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm sorry. It's been I kind of dropped off the face of the earth there for a while. I've just been really busy. I suddenly got lots of things on the go, and it all happened at once.
You mean you have a life? You mean
I
tell
do.
Me you have a? Oh my!
Yeah, I do. It doesn't just take place here online. I am not just an avatar.
Well, I'm glad to know that. At least you can bring us some insights. And I want everybody to know we're going to be talking about this character called Onan. And Dr. Kill, I'm going to just go by his actual name because I can't tell you how many people he has on his, how many teardrops he has, you know, that you can't see them, but they're there. That's how many bodies he has, his body count. He's going to take us into this. I have honestly very little clues as to what you might be doing today. So we're going to be learning from you. You are going to give us a presentation, but I must demand, I have to tell everybody, if you
Derek didn't read the video description, I guess.
Well, I did, but I imagine you're going to go into things that, shh, dude, we talked about this before the show. What's up, everybody? I know what I'm talking about. No, seriously, go subscribe to Dr. Kipp's YouTube channel. Hit that bell. He has a lot of great content you really should get your hands on. And of course, he will be picking it up when he doesn't have as much of a life going on.
When the life fades into the background, I shall return.
You also have this website here, Lying Pen. This is a project that you've been working on?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Although even, I haven't done a lot with them recently, but the Lying Pen of Scribes project is a large project out of the University of YHWH in Norway, working on issues of forgery and provenance and the ethics of discovery and publication of ancient artifacts. So it's a very, very interesting, exciting, and important project.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing more. Obviously, you come and leak that out here on the internet world. And also, we've got the Patreon. I just dropped a short, Allah tricked Christians in the Quran, of course. You see this in the Gnostic text, Simon of Cyrene. I know. We're going to have to talk about his etiquette. I kind of wonder the same thing. So anyway, that will be launched at some point on YouTube. It's on my TikTok. But if you want to go support me here on MythVision, you can on the Patreon. You can also harass me in messages. I take harassment pretty lightly. So you could do that. So Dr. Kipp, what do you have us for today?
Right. So you might want to pin Endo's question. He already asked one.
Okay, everybody
so just put a...
Send out your super chats. We will get to them for Q&A. They are greatly appreciated. They keep me doing here what I do at MythVision. If it weren't for the support that I do get through super chats, I honestly mean this, with my Patreon included, I wouldn't be able to do what I do full time. So I am so appreciative to everybody who does support us here. But we are going to get to your questions, I promise, after the presentation, so we can wrap our head around what you have for us, Dr. Kill.
And hopefully some of them will end up being answered through the presentation itself. But I need to I need to just start with a couple of caveats. Despite the incredibly sexy introduction that you put together, there's not going to be any talk. There's no Dead Sea Scroll stuff today, I'm afraid.
It's okay.
None of that.
I'll cry after the show. I'll cry after the show.
And there will also be no singing. So,
dang it.
So this is something, and I think you actually sort of poked me about this, Derek, and I think it's because I probably just kind of hinted at it or talked a little bit about it in some of the streams that I've done with you in the past. But
you teased me.
There's this. What's that?
You teased me.
Yeah, I teased you. So there's this really strange story in Genesis 38. We're going to read it shortly. So maybe stick your finger in your Bible, folks, and open it up to Genesis 38. So this is a weird story. For a couple of reasons. I mean, it's weird because of the stuff that happens in there. It's weird because of its placement within the book of Genesis. So what's going on here? And we're going to explore that today. And I actually think it's pretty exciting. There's not been a lot of work done on this connection that I'm going to discuss today. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit. These are not my ideas. A couple are, but most of them are not my ideas. This is work from other scholars. But I think this is an interesting question that continues to deserve further exploration. So I put together a presentation. So if we can start that,
let's do it
right now. Let's do it.
Hit that like button, everybody, as we get into this. All right, we are sharing the screen. They can see all the porno that you've been searching. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
What the hell, eh? So here's my title page. Does everybody see it? Can you read it?
The seed of Onan and the succession of David.
Yeah. So it's pretty good, eh?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, bummer. I didn't put the transitions that I wanted in. This was pretty hastily put together, so my apologies at the outset. All right. So, just by way of introduction, one of the things that we're going to be zeroing in on today are ideological tensions within the Hebrew Bible. One of the things that really, really excites me about the biblical literature is the fact that it's vast. There's so much there, and the fact that it's diverse, and it was written and collected by all sorts of different people over all, a fairly lengthy period of time. And what gets caught up in all of this are surviving bits of competing politics, competing religion, competing theology, competing ideology. And in my opinion, it's one of the most fun things about studying the Bible is looking and teasing apart these tensions that exist there. And I think that speaks a lot to the story that we're going to get into in Genesis chapter 38. So by way of example, some of the tensions that exist within the biblical texts with regards to the priesthood. You have a group of priests known as the Levites, and a group of priests known as the Bnei Aharon, or the sons of Aaron, or the Aaronites. There, if you look closely enough and carefully enough, you'll discover that these are competing groups of priests. The Bnei Aharon, the Aaronites, are the ones who basically controlled the transmission of the text. So much of the theology and much of the voice of the Levites is very muted, but it's still kind of there. And it's an interesting tension. Just by way of background, the Aaronite priesthood seems to have been native to the city of Jebus, which became the city of Jerusalem when David conquered it. And his reason for entering the city and taking over and conquering the city of Jerusalem was a part of an effort to consolidate his power over these 12 tribes that loosely call themselves Israel. So Jerusalem was fairly central. So he decided, this is where I'm going to rule from, and he had to take the city away from the Jebusites. Now, as you can imagine, there's still tons of Jebusites living in the city of Jerusalem after David took it over. And one of the concessions I believe that he made to the city was the retention of their high priest, Zadok, alongside the high priest who was serving at the shrine in Shiloh up until this point, Abiathar, or his son Ahimelech. So this was a sign of his concession to the Jebusite residents, and it's part of his own effort to consolidate power between the north and the south. You can read about some of this stuff in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 17. In 1 Kings 2, verse 26 to 27, Abiathar, who's the Levitical high priest, ends up getting exiled because of his involvement in the politics and being on the wrong side of the politics that follow David's rule. And so he and his group of priests is exiled to a place called Anatoth. And this is also the city where Jeremiah came from. Many centuries later, Jeremiah was a Levitical priest from the same line of Abiathar in the city of Anatoth. Okay, so we've got Levites and Aaronites. another tension takes place between the north and the south. We know of two kingdoms that comprised all of Israel. We're told there was once a united kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon. But then thereafter, Solomon's son Rehoboam oversaw, or was in power when there was a rebellion, and the north split away from the south, and things remained that way until the exile first of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians, and then by the southern kingdom by the Babylonians. And throughout the text, you'll also find some hints of this tension between the north and the south. Quite often, the north is referred to not as Israel, but as Ephraim, and the south, which comprises the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, is referred to collectively as Judah. You can read about the rebellion in 1 Kings chapter 11 and 12. And finally, there's tensions between royalists and amphictyonics. There's a word for you.
Do not ask me to pronounce that.
Amphictyonics. So everyone say it together. Amphictyonics. And this is a pretty. I think this is a really interesting tension within the text, and this is the tension that takes place between those people who were pro-monarchy and those people who were not. And the people who were not pro-monarchy, I mean, we read about, you see some of this in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 to 18. Samuel echoes the complaints and the concerns of the no monarchy crowd, the amphictyonics, who are opposed to having a king. But they're part of this tribal confederacy that wishes to remain decentralized, is concerned about the cost and the cost of installing a monarchy, and the responsibilities that are going to result from that. There's also another really interesting critique that appears in the parable of Jotham in Judges chapter 9, verses 7 to 15, and I'm just going to read this because I think it's pretty cool. And I believe this is probably a fairly early text. For today, I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version, just because this is the Bible that was close by. I have no special affinity or connection to this text, but this is what I have on hand for today. So here we go. I'm in Joshua. That's no good. Judges chapter 9, verse 7. So now, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out and said to them. So this is Jotham, who's opposed to the installation of monarchy. Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over the trees? Then the trees said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease to my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees? Then the tree said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, should I cease my new vine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, or the thistle, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So what's the message behind this parable, this story? if you think about it, it is pretty clear. I think sometimes these things tend to get lost in the translation of between the languages and over a long periods of time. But if you listen carefully to how the parable unfolds, the basic message is that a king is worthless. People in the parable, the trees all have useful functions, and they all, wisely understand that what they're doing is much more important than, being a ruler. And who ends up being the king of the trees? The useless thistle. And he rules through fear. So this is just by way of introduction. There are ideological tensions in the Hebrew Bible, and I want us to keep this kind of in the back of our mind as we begin exploring this story. How are we doing, Derek?
We're doing. So we have people who don't want a king. We see that clearly in the text, of course.
Yep.
There's this idea they don't want a king, and there are people who do. They're crying out for a king.
Yep.
Of course, eventually they get a king. Saul
Correct.
first, of course, then David. So someone won out.
That's right. That's right. So, and the people who didn't win out didn't just go away. I think that's important. I mean, the text provides the sense that the opponents of the majority opinion just disappeared. This is not the case. The unfortunate thing is that we don't have surviving literature from the losers. And in order to discover what's really going on amid these tensions, it requires some careful, clever reading of the text. But we're here to talk about this story in Genesis chapter 38. The story of Judah and Tamar. So maybe we should just read that now. I will read it unless you're dying to.
Nope, you can go ahead.
Okay. So starting in verse 1, Genesis chapter 38. Came to pass at the time that Judah departed from his brothers. This is important. He departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hirah. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he married her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Cheziv when she bore him. And Judah took the wife for Now, before we continue, I think it's important. One of the things that we're going to pay close attention to in this story are the names of the characters as they occur. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Wicked. I'm gonna do the proper replacement here. Was wicked in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh killed him. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir for your brother." So this is part of the this is part of the proper tradition that and it's in order to secure and ensure the proper transmission of the inheritance. So when a woman is suddenly widowed, the tradition was in Israel that the brother, the oldest brother, would take her on as his wife in order to secure her inheritance and the inheritance of her children. So Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." So this is the focus point. The importance here is having an heir, having a heritage. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, or he spilled his seed on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased Yahweh. Therefore, he killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah is grown." For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. The time of the year that this takes place is also significant. This takes place, this episode that we're going to get into now takes place during the sheep shearing season. And it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." She took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, a prostitute, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her way and said, "Please let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" And he said, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." And he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. Then Judah sent a young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand. But he did not find her. Then he asked the men of the place, saying, "Where's the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said, "There was no harlot in this place." Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be ashamed. So I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. And it came to pass after 3 months that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." So she was brought out. She sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose they are, the signet cord and staff." Dun, dun, dun. So Judah acknowledged them and said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he never knew her again. Now it came to pass at that time. Okay, so I think we can stop it there at verse 26. So this is a story that's about the importance of the inheritance of Judah. But then there's all this weird stuff at the beginning that's also, there's all these sons involved, and there's Yahweh striking them down, and there's Onan, ejaculating on the ground instead of impregnating the wife of his brother like he's supposed to. So yeah, it's strange, and it's what's going on here? What is happening in this story? So first of all, let's take a look. Remember, I said it's important to remember the names of the people involved in this story. So we're going to begin by looking at the cast of characters. First, we have Judah. Judah is the proper heir. He is the considered the heir of the heritage for basically the whole nation of Israel, and this is secured through the dynastic succession of David. I'm not going to read the text, but there's a text in Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 to 12, which basically elevate Judah above his brothers. I believe he's actually the third or the fourth born son of Jacob, and yet he becomes, he takes the place of the heir, of the firstborn. Then we have Hira, the Adulamite. This is what his name looks like in Hebrew. And I show this because when it gets to reading the other stories in the dynastic succession narrative, in 2 Samuel, the look, the way the names appear in Hebrew will become important. Then we have the daughter of Shua. This is literally Bat Ish Kanani Ushmo Shua. The daughter of Shua in Hebrew is literally Bat Shua. Okay? The daughter of Shua is the wife of Judah. We then have the sons of Bat Shua, Onan, and Shelah. And finally, the wife of Tamar. You with me?
Yep.
Uh-oh. Oh, you're there?
I
okay.
mute.
Okay.
Thanks to everybody in the chat, by the way. Thank you.
Okay. All right. If you need to stop me, or if you have any questions or need to say anything, then just throw it out there. Okay, Derek?
Good to go, brother.
Okay. So this story, on the face of it, seems disruptive. It occurs in the middle of the story of Joseph. So in Genesis chapter 37, right at the end of the chapter, Joseph has been sold into slavery in Egypt. Then we have this story about Judah. And then right after the story about Judah is finished, the story picks up about Joseph and his time in Egypt. So it really just sort of plunks itself right there in the middle of this otherwise very neat and tidily put together story about Joseph. So that's weird. On the other hand, the patriarch Judah is also the only one of Jacob's sons that also features an independent, dedicated story as this one. So it's significant. What's going on here? So for answers, we need to think more carefully about the setting in which this story was told. So this story is part of the J narrative, or the YHWH text of the YHWH text that came to form the Pentateuch. This is according to the documentary hypothesis. The J source was thought to be in existence at least as early as Hezekiah's rule in the 8th century, and possibly stretched back much earlier. So in order to understand more clearly this story, let's take a look at another text commonly called the succession narrative, beginning in 2 Samuel chapter 9, and in particular, the story of the other Tamar. There's 2 Tamars in the Hebrew Bible. There's actually 3, but the third one is the daughter of this second one. So right away, there's an obvious connection between these stories, and this is something that we need to pay close attention to.
This is where it's going to get juicy, right?
This is where it's going to get juicy. So the other Tamar appears in 2 Samuel 13, verses 1 to 33. Now, Tamar is a daughter of the king David, and she's a brother of she's the sister of Absalom, David's second son, the full sister of Absalom. So in this story, and let's just go there, and we'll read this one in its entirety, but then that's it. Okay, so no, that's 1 Samuel. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 13. There we go. Okay. So after this, this story follows on the heels of the story of David's sin with Bathsheba and his murder of Uriah the Hittite, her husband, and it also takes place during the war with the Ammonites. After this, Absalom, I'm starting at the beginning of chapter 13. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick. For she was a virgin. That's why he became sick, apparently. And it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her, but Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. Now, when Yonadab was a very crafty man, and he said to him, "Why are you, the king's son, becoming thinner day after day? Will you not tell me?" Now, Amnon is the firstborn of David. He is the heir to the throne by rights. Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." So Yonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" Then Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let Tamar, my sister, come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight, that I may eat them from her hand." And David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Now go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down. She took flour and kneaded it, and cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. Then she took the pan and placed them out before him, but he refused to eat. Then Amnon said, "Have everyone go out from me." And they all went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into my bedroom, that I may eat from your hand." I mentioned this, I think, in other lectures before, and I think it bears repeating that very often throughout the Hebrew Bible, food and eating can be metaphoric for lust and sexual promiscuity.
So it's another euphemism, like what Francesca Stravakapulu will talk about, euphemisms.
Euphemisms, yeah. It's not a really common one, but it does occur, and I think the real focus on food imagery throughout these verses here probably plays into that a little bit. Okay, so let's continue. And Tamar took the cakes that she had made and brought them to Amnon, and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. Now, when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." But she answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. So Amnon raped Tamar. Then Amnon hated her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Arise, be gone." So she said to him, "No, indeed, this evil thing sending me away is worse than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. Then he called his servant who attended him and said, "Here, put this woman out, away from me, and bolt the door behind her." Now she had on a robe of many colors, for the king's virgin daughters wore such apparel. And his servant put her out and bolted the door behind her. Then Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her robe of many colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, and went away crying bitterly. And Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you? But now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart." So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. But when David heard all of these things, he was very angry, and Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. I'm going to stop there. So we're going to take a look here at the characters that play a prominent role in this story, certainly as they pertain to the other story in Genesis chapter 38. First, we have Amnon, who's the oldest son of David and the heir by rights, first in line for the throne. of David. Then we have Tamar, who is the sister of Absalom and the daughter of David. And importantly, Absalom is he's Amnon's rival. So by right of succession, Amnon should be the next king of Israel. But the way this works in antiquity is not entirely straightforward. The king chooses his heir ultimately. And one of the problems, one of the real tensions that we see through the very lengthy succession narrative, the whole point of the succession narrative, or I should say one of the whole points of the succession narrative, is to establish the legitimacy of Solomon, the very young son of David. But also, all of this takes place through the very, very problematic situation in which David, for whatever reason, has not, throughout his entire reign, adopted an heir, provided a legitimate, he's not provided a plan of succession for his kingdom. And this is a problem. So what's taking place throughout the succession narrative, and we're going to get into that shortly here. What's taking place is this competition between the sons of David for the throne of Israel. And Absalom is Amnon's competitor. He's the next in line after Amnon. That's important. Okay? Everyone still with us?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I get where this is going.
Right. So, okay, then we have Absalom, the second son of David, the rival of Amnon. Okay. So, yeah, so that's the story. And what do I have here? So Amnon is the oldest son of David. He harbors an obsession, the text tells us, with the beautiful sister of his half-brother and rival Absalom. He conspires to have Tamar in his home. He rapes her, but then dishonors her by refusing to take her as his own wife. Absalom is enraged. And then the story goes on to tell us that he kills Amnon during sheep shearing season in Baal Chatzor. So all of this takes place within a larger section of the text known as the succession narrative that I've mentioned a few times now. And this is a section beginning in 2 Samuel chapter 9, really with David's rape of Bathsheba and murder of Uriah, her husband. And it stretches all the way through to 1 Kings 11, comprising, basically the totality of Solomon's rule. So the succession narrative is royal propaganda for the legitimate succession of Solomon amid these political tensions in Israel. Not only this competition between David's sons, which is prompted by David's failure to, throughout his rule, make for a plan of succession. So there's this tension, but then we also have this tension between the north and the south still in place. We have this other tension between the house of Saul and the house of David. Now, David secures the throne from the house of Saul, which really, comprises the bulk of what takes place throughout 1 Samuel and is a feature of 2 Samuel up to this point in chapter 9. But remember what I said, while the throne of Israel has been secured by David from Saul, from the family of Saul, they didn't just go away. There's still descendants from Saul kicking around. There is still in the minds of them, and no doubt many other people living in the land, in their minds, there is still a legitimate claim of Saul's for the throne of Israel. So David's also, trying to, there's this tension taking place within the narrative as well. And then there's, the priestly politics between the Levites and the Aaronites. It's in there, and we're probably not going to talk a lot about that, but there's all this tension. There's all these competing voices behind these texts. So this is part of the Deuteronomistic history. which was most likely composed at some point in the reign of Josiah in Jerusalem, sometime between 640 to 609 BCE. And one of the purposes of the Deuteronomistic history, the primary purpose of the Deuteronomistic history, is to establish the temple in Jerusalem as the only place where you can offer sacrifices to Yahweh. And it's also the establishment of the correct code of conduct for the rulers of Israel and for the people of Israel. But one of the other purposes of the Deuteronomistic history is the legitimation of the line of David through one of his youngest heirs, Solomon. And it seems likely that the succession narrative predates the composition of the Deuteronomistic history, but it was almost certainly heavily redacted by Josiah's administration when the larger history was put together. So much of the work from this point in the succession narrative I'm drawing from a scholar named Don C. Benjamin, and he writes it up in his introductory text on the Hebrew Bible in terms of trials, beginning with the trial of David in 2 Samuel chapter 9. I think that's wrong. That should be 2 Samuel 12:31. Sorry for the typo, everyone. So from 2 Samuel chapter 9 through chapter 12 is the trial of David. And this is the story of David, his rape of Bathsheba, who he sees bathing on the roof of a house while he is being naughty by staying at home while his troops are off at war, fighting a war with Ehrman. He brings her into his house, he rapes her, he gets her pregnant. Her husband, Uriah, is one of his captains in his army. And this is in part to conceal an attempt to conceal the pregnancy, although I think it would have been almost impossible given that Bathsheba was raped. I mean, there's very little question among biblical commentators that she has no agency at all in this transaction between the king and her. I think it's fair to suggest that her husband knew that this had taken place. David attempts to get him to either to sleep with his wife as a way to basically take back this shamed woman, and he doesn't do so. So ultimately, David ends up murdering him, and then by placing him in a compromising situation in battle, and then he takes Bathsheba back into his own harem, into his own household. So now the sexual imagery throughout the succession narrative is something that we're going to need to talk a little bit about, and it's significantly connected to the affairs of state. And at this point, I'm going to actually read from Benjamin's introductory text a little bit about this. So speaking of Uriah, I'll just move beyond this. So today, he says, sexual activity carries personal and romantic connotations. In the world of the Bible, sexual activity carried economic and political connotations. Sexual relationships were a measure of the honor and shame of households. And we've already seen some of that occurring in the story of Tamar. She complains bitterly about this right away. Women like Bathsheba were important in the distribution of power. The Hebrews rated a father's fulfillment of his responsibility to feed and protect his household on the basis of how well he cared for and protected its women. The women of the household were living symbols of its honor and a measure of the fixed assets of a household. If the father of a household could protect the women of his household, then he could protect all its members. If he left them in harm's way, then he was impeached as someone else who took over the land and children of his household. To test the stability or honor of a household, a man from another household attempted to rape one of its women. Rape was not simply an act of sexual violence, but a political challenge to the father of the household to which the women belonged. It was a hostile takeover bid. Stories involving rape or adultery, like those of Shechem and Dinah, David and Bathsheba, or Amnon and Tamar, are not soap operas describing how men and women feel for each other or explaining why they hurt each other. Like war, rape was a violent social process for redistributing the limited goods that a society possessed so that it was not destroyed by the weakness of a single household. If a household could not protect its women, rape declared the household to be insolent or shamed and unable to fulfill its responsibilities to the community as a whole. So, my hope is that sort of sets this story about Amnon and Tamar, which is ultimately part of the succession narrative, into a more clear light with regards to the sexual activity taking place here. So, Benjamin tells us that in the trial of David, the king is indicted for failing to protect and provide for the land of Israel and its people by abusing his power in taking over the household of Saul. There's a whole section of text, like I said, that we're not going to go into, dealing with the house of Saul prior to 2 Samuel chapter 9, and the household of Uriah. In each case, David fails to negotiate an effective covenant for his succession and instead uses force to implement his claim. So David rapes Bathsheba, then murders her husband, who is serving him in war with Ammon. The succession as I said, this is the sexual imagery is closely connected to affairs of state. So this is the trial of David. You with me? Hello?
I am. My wife just called, so I'm listening to you. My wife just called me, literally, so I'm muted.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, we're going to continue with the trial of Amnon. And this appears in 2 Samuel chapter 13, 1 to 14, verse 33. So we already read this. This is the rape of Tamar. And Don Benjamin tells us that Amnon's failure is to negotiate a covenant for land and children. And I'm going to read something else that he says here in connection to this story, on page 216. So it's important here, looking at this story. Let's see where to start here. Okay. David is not so. At the beginning of the story, Amnon asked David to come see him because he's sick. He's pretending to be sick. And David is not simply a concerned parent coming to the bedside of a sick child. He is a royal magistrate hearing Amnon's petition in a court of law. Unlike a village assembly, which listens to many witnesses and discusses a case until the elders reach a consensus, royal magistrates simply hear a plaintiff and then render a decision. Tamar belongs to the household of Absalom. Remember, Absalom is Amnon's rival, which may have already made an attempt on Amnon's life. So Amnon asks David to make it directly responsible for his safety, which also makes the household of Amnon directly responsible for her safety. So what's happening here is Amnon is asking for Tamar to come visit him, in part as, I guess, a protection against future attacks, against the threat that he perceives from Absalom. So this crisis episode portrays Amnon as a fool who cannot negotiate a covenant for land and children. Amnon tries to impose a covenant on the household of Absalom by ordering Tamar to have intercourse with him. Amnon exploits Tamar's vulnerability by telling her to bake bread for him and to have sexual intercourse with him. The request invites Tamar to commit Absalom's resources to Amnon's campaign to become monarch in David's place. She tells Amnon that if he wants a covenant between his household and the household of Absalom, he needs to negotiate for it. Remember, she tells him, talk to David. He will not withhold me from you. Amnon is a fool who acts on impulse. Tamar is wise because she is patient. The wise know when to talk and when to listen. Fools are hot-tempered because they let passion run or ruin their lives. Tamar's words shame Amnon, just as the women from Shunem shame Elijah, Michal shames David, Jezebel shames Jehu. 3 times Tamar appeals to Amnon, assuring him that if he can be patient and negotiate with David, their marriage could ratify a covenant between the household of Amnon and Absalom. So, I mean, part of the tragedy, when the reader or the listener of this story in its original setting hears it, of course they're upset about the fact that Amnon has raped Tamar. But then they're also disgusted by the fact that Amnon then puts her out, puts her away, tells her to leave his house. And this is a signal to them that Amnon is absolutely not a suitable ruler for the nation of Israel. So he fails that trial. And then he's killed by Absalom. And something very interesting happens. Absalom it says that 2 years transpire after this takes place before Absalom comes to the king and asks him to come out to Baal Hazor, where he's shearing the sheep. And David says, no, we're fine. Thank you very much. Go in peace. Blessings upon you. And then Absalom says, well, no, at least send Amnon and my brothers out. And David again says, no, they're going to stay here. And finally, he says, please, you've got to send Amnon out to meet me for shearing the sheep. And David relents, and Amnon goes, and he gets drunk, and Absalom kills him. And all the rest of the sons of David flee from the scene. Now, it's an important question, I think, to ask here. Why does David resist Absalom's request to have Amnon and his brothers meet him at the sheep shearers in Baal Hazor? Are you still with me, Derek?
Yes, I'm muted. You literally caught me like the one moment my wife called me last time. You literally were asking for attention. I was like, "Oh crap, she's in the middle." No, we're good now. I'm tracking where you're going.
Okay. So, any thoughts though? Absalom asked David to send Amnon out, and David says no.
Yeah, this gets back to what Tamar was trying to say, in my opinion. When you press him, if you ask enough, there seems to be these triplets that keep happening of he'll relent eventually. But also I keep thinking of doublets and triplets and things in narrative format. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here and already thinking in this political sense of the seed. It's going back. We see this kind of repetitive narrative happening over and over again, and it's legitimating the Judahites, I think, or the people from the southern kingdom, because here you have Judah pop in the middle of this story that would have probably been a northern kingdom story to legitimate the whole descendants from that area of Jerusalem. And there's so much that's going into my head here that's making me think, okay, but maybe I'm jumping the gun in this presentation because I know you're probably going there and I don't want to give away too much, but this is looking really interesting. Cool.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to say it's good for you to be paying attention to the literary features, and this idea of repetition is definitely one of them. But I'm going to suggest here too that David's refusal to send Amnon out to meet Absalom is a signal to what's actually going on here. David knows and understands that there is a competition taking place between these two figures. And I think this is in part and it's a weird thing for him to do. And this could also be considered part of a failure on David's part to just let them sort it out, which is what the proper thing to do would have been. Let them prove who the rightful successor should be. But he seems to not want that to happen. It looks like he's almost trying to protect Amnon because he knows what Absalom is going to do. So, and I think on the reader, the listener in the original context that this story was told is probably going to key in on that and going, well, that's a dumb thing for David to do. That's a failure on David's part, to try and get in the way of these two guys duking it out. So, but that's what's going on here. David knows that Absalom's intentions are to extract vengeance and to restore Tamar's honor. Okay, so that's the trial of Amnon within this succession narrative. The next one is the trial of Absalom, and it's huge, basically stretching from chapter 15 through chapter 24. So after Absalom kills Amnon, Absalom flees because he's worried about his own safety and his own life. I think not necessarily from his father, but also from brothers, because they see the game is afoot. Absalom just killed his closest rival and has now secured the position of the top dog. He's the one who is in line to be the heir of the throne. So he's probably, concerned for his own safety from other rivals within the household of David. So he flees. He's away for 3 years. He eventually comes back safely, and his safety is secured by Joab. After coming back, he starts a campaign to become the heir and tries to essentially overthrow David. He orchestrates a coup, and it's interesting how he does so. Absalom plots to usurp David's rule by staging a coronation in Hebron. Do you know anything about Hebron?
I mean, I know I've heard of the place, but as far as if you handed me a
within
map
the
and
biblical
said, where
story,
is it?
Do you know why it's important?
No, help me out.
Okay. Hebron is the city where David became king. It was his first seat of power. And as I mentioned, he ended up moving into Jerusalem in part to establish and to centralize his rule over the entire kingdom. But originally, Hebron was the place of his coronation. So what Absalom is doing here is he's signaling his own legitimacy through going to Hebron and proclaiming himself king there, because this is where it all began, right? All of this stuff, it's very, very symbolic. It's very important. The other thing that he does, so when this happens, and because there seems to be a lot of support for Absalom's claim to the throne, David decides to take his household and leave the city of Jerusalem, because he sees that Absalom is going to come there next and exert his power there. So David flees to save his own life and to save the lives of his family members. But then he chooses to leave 10 concubines in the city. Absalom comes into the city, and upon entering the city, he publicly rapes these 10 wives of David. And this is a demonstration that he is now the king of Israel, who will fulfill the terms of the covenants that the household of David has with the households of the 10 other tribes of Israel. So the symbol here is that these wives, these 10 wives that David left in the capital, are they're symbolic for the power of the 10 tribes of Israel. So when Absalom rapes them, it says he takes, they pitch a tent on top of the house and he rapes them in view of all of Israel for everyone to see. This is his proclamation to them. You're my bitch now. I'm in charge. Okay?
Bro, like, who said we need Game of Thrones? Someone just needs
no, we do not.
I mean, this is enough, right? What in the world?
This is wild stuff, eh?
Yeah.
So, ultimately,
in Sunday school, I just can't imagine, like, and then Absalom, little children, Absalom. Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I had a picture Bible, which was like my favorite when I was a kid. I mean, I wore the covers off of that thing. But yeah, this story wasn't in there. So, or at least a very sanitized version of this story took its place. So there's after this, there's a fairly lengthy, a good portion of the story is committed to Absalom's choice of advisors. One is loyal to the house of David and seems to have been planted in there to basically give Absalom poor advice so that David can get the upper hand. And ultimately Absalom is killed, his rebellion is quashed, and we move on. We're told there's another rebellion by a guy, a man by the name of Sheba. He mounts against David. There's another story in there about the house of Saul. So the picture that we get during this whole succession narrative is that this is a tumultuous time, and David's power on the throne of Israel is absolutely not secure. I mean, 2 attempted coups. You've got this infighting and competition amongst your sons to overthrow you. And you've also got the family of Saul, who's still kicking around in the background. I mean, it's a dangerous time. And this is basically how it plays out for the rest of David's life. And he spends his entire life without ever installing a plan of succession. And this is, as I mentioned before, a huge problem. So we finally get to the trial of Adonijah, which takes place in 1 Kings verses 1 to 10. According to Benjamin, Amnon's failure is to negotiate. Amnon's failure is to honor his father David. He fails to honor his father David. He says he attempts to usurp David's authority as father of the household and appoints himself as heir. So let's take a look at how this story begins. I'm going to ask you to read this, Derek, because I feel like I'm talking too much.
First Kings 1 through 10.
1 Kings chapter 1, and I'm just going to get you to read this first little bit here. Verses 1. Let me get it here. Verses 1 through 4. Okay. This is how the story begins.
I have the ESV version. Now King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. Therefore his servants said to him, "Let a young woman be sought for my lord, the king, and let her wait on the king and be in his service. Let her lie in your arms, that my lord, the king, may be warm." So they sought for a beautiful young woman throughout all the territory of Israel and found Abishag. Is that how you say it? Abishag. The
Shulamite.
The Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The young woman was very beautiful, and she was of service to the king and attended to him, but the king knew her not.
Right. So this is a very another fairly sanitized story. What's the deal here with Abishag, the Shunammite? What's she doing here with the king? Why is she there?
What's keeping him warm, like hugging and
cuddling? You really think she's keeping? No, do you think that's what's going on?
Are they spooning, but they're just not going all the way? What's
supposed to happen, do you think?
I would think, yeah, she's beautiful. Like there's a lot of attention to her looks, her body, and things like that. So you would think,
so
but
what's the expectation that will take place here? What
supposed to lie with her?
He's supposed to have sex with her.
Yeah.
Right. Now, he doesn't. And this is a problem because this is a signal to the people that David is impotent. He can no longer have sex with the woman, even the most beautiful woman in Israel. He can no longer get it up. You cannot have a king who can no longer get it up.
Wow.
And
okay.
To make matters worse, we still don't have a plan of succession in place. So this is why Adonijah does what Adonijah does. Okay? He's aware of the danger that David's impotence and indecisiveness poses to Israel. He attempts to usurp David's authority as father of the household and appoints himself heir. So, yeah, the story begins by noting David's impotence. As an old man, says Benjamin, he cannot have intercourse, even with the most seductive woman in Israel. He is no longer fit to be king, but still has not adopted an heir. This is a crisis. And ultimately, it's a crisis that requires the intervention of Bathsheba, David's wife, before David agrees to finally adopt Solomon, who is finally installed as the rightful king of Jerusalem. But given that Solomon's control over the tribal confederacy is short-lived, I think this is another signal to us to help us see with perfect clarity the tenuousness of David's own grip on power. This is not a healthy kingdom, the United Kingdom of Israel. It's teetering on the point of dissolution from the start. And it never gets better to the point where after Solomon dies, the whole thing falls apart. So this is why there are so many threats to Solomon's succession. And I think, so Adonijah's failure in all of this, I would suggest, is that he's the only one. Okay, think of the three competitors. You've got Amnon, you've got Absalom, you've got Adonijah. Adonijah is the only one who fails to do one thing that both Absalom and Amnon did. What's that?
Fill me in. I don't know.
He didn't have sex with anyone.
So so we're getting, and I just want to remind everybody. So now that you're filling in this pieces, this gets back to this Genesis 38 very clearly.
We're getting back to this now.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. So, but this is the messy succession narrative. The problem here is the fact that there's no heir in place. There's no plan of succession. This is a huge problem. There are these brutal competitions between David's sons for the throne because he has usurped his own responsibility to install an heir. There's 2 coup attempts, or sorry, I guess there's 3 ultimately coup attempts because David has usurped his responsibility to install an heir. And then throughout this whole thing, you've got this. You've also got this failure of David, who really behaves like a despot in asserting his power inappropriately through the rape of Bathsheba. And I would suggest too that the rape of Tamar by Amnon is also, in many respects, a way of being very critical of David's rape of Bathsheba, without actually.
Yeah. He couldn't protect her. He couldn't protect her.
Yes.
He couldn't. Right.
Yes. So there's all this stuff going on. Now I'm going to suggest to you that the story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38 at the heart of it, is really commenting and exploring what's taking place here
it's
in the
anachronistic
succession narrative. No, that's not the.
They're kind of putting
it's like a parable.
Okay.
It's like a parable or a metaphor. I'm going to suggest it's a social critique of the house of David. In many ways, it could be read one of two ways, and we'll sort of get into that. But there's definitely an element of social criticism here, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at how these two passages compare to one another. All right, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
We're going to look at Genesis 38, and we're going to focus in on 2 Samuel 13, which is the rape of Tamar, which is really where the connection between these two passages coalesces. So first of all, you have the protagonists, Judah. Judah is a shepherd who separates. Remember, I repeated this when I read the story. It's important. He separates from his brothers, his kinsmen, at Adullam. We read that in Genesis chapter 38, verse 1. You have David. He is a shepherd. David also separated from his kinsmen at Adullam. And this takes place in 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. In 1 Chronicles, so Adullam is the place, the cave where David, it says he goes and hides out in a cave in Adullam. And this is sort of the first place he goes and where he gathers his forces, the mighty men of David. This is where his army of renegades is first put together, and from which he embarks on his campaign against the house of Saul. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Judah's friend, the name of Judah's friend is Hira. And I want you to pay attention, even if you can't read the language. I want you to pay attention to how this looks. Okay, the Hebrew name. David's closest ally, his closest political ally, is Hiram, the king of Tyre. Hiram is the one who builds David's house. Hiram is the one who provisions and basically is contracted to build the temple in Jerusalem for Solomon. It's exactly the names are, for all intents and purposes, the same. The only difference is the final letter, where Hira is spelled with a hey, Hiram is spelled with a mem. Okay. Judah's wife is the daughter of Shua, literally Bat-shua. David's wife is Bathsheba. Bathsheba. but turn your Bible. Okay, flip now, Derek, to 1 Chronicles 3, verse 5, and read it.
All right, 1 Chronicles 3, like chapter 1, 3 through 5?
No, 1 Chronicles
3,
chapter 3, verse 5. Remember, there's two.
Okay, got it. These were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemiah, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon, 4 by Bathshua, the daughter of Amiel. I got an ESV.
Yes, and that's right. So what's the name of his wife in Chronicles?
Bathshua.
Bathshua.
Not Bathsheba. Yeah, it's the name. It's the same name as Judah's wife.
It's the same name.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay. Wow.
There's a connection here, right?
I'm tracking.
The name of Judah's first son is Er, by Bathshua, and Er is suddenly killed by Yahweh, because of some transgression. Bathsheba becomes pregnant by David. When he rapes her, she gives birth to a son, and the text tells us that Yahweh strikes him and kills him. So David's first son by Bathsheba is also suddenly killed by Yahweh for David's transgression. Judah's second son name, his second son by Bathshua, his name is Onan. David's first son and the heir to his throne is named Amnon. And really, the only difference, again, between these two names is the insertion of a letter mem. You have Onan, and you have Amnon.
Just to ask, in this, Judah's second son, Onan, wouldn't this be David's technical second son if the first one wasn't killed by Yahweh?
Well, except the order's mixed up here a little bit, because Amnon was born long before Bathsheba was raped by David. So I mean, it's not a perfect correspondence, but I think for the purposes of what's going on in Genesis chapter 38, it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Judah's third son, his name is Shelah. And we see in this story, Judah's failure in this story of Tamar is really to provide for her an heir. He says, first, here's the problem. She is the wife of Er, but he dies before she becomes pregnant and has children. He gives it to Onan. And we're told Onan spills his seed, and that makes Yahweh angry, so he kills him. Then she's given to Shelah. And Judah says, Shelah's too young. I'm going to put you away in my house. You'll remain in my household. And then when he becomes of age, you can marry him, and you will have your inheritance secured through him. But then Shelah becomes of age, and Judah does nothing. So Judah reneges on his word. And I've been hammering away on this throughout the succession narrative. One of the big problems throughout the succession narrative is the fact that David does nothing with regards to the plan of succession. There's the same thing going on here.
Right.
So because Judah has reneged on his responsibility, Tamar is forced to take matters into her own hands, and goes into this elaborate plot to pose as a prostitute in order to become impregnated by Judah in order to secure her own inheritance, essentially. So David's second son by Bathsheba is Solomon, and in Hebrew it's Shlomo. And it looks like this. And as with some of the other characters, the only difference between the name Shlomo and Shelah is the insertion of this mem, just between the lamed and the hey. And of course, at the conclusion of the story, David, still reneging on his responsibility, fails to provide a plan for succession. And what has to happen? Bathsheba is the one who goes and takes matters into her own hands and provides for the inheritance of her own son. So that's it. I would say, in terms of the relationship between the two texts, I think Genesis 38 was a story that was pulled in by the Yahwist, but was out there for a long time. Maybe this is a story that might have emerged, right around the time that Solomon became the king in Israel, or right after David passed away. And I think there's possibly one or two things. It could be read one of two ways. So I'm going to suggest that this is either an oppositional critique, something that was invented by the rivals of David, perhaps by the house of Saul, delivered as a censure for the house of David for the illegitimate succession that occurred as a result of David's rape of Bathsheba. Or alternatively, it could have been an internal apologetic offered as an explanation for the legitimacy of succession, despite David's guilt. You'll remember and you'll note that another thing in common between both stories is at the end of the story in Genesis 38, Judah is publicly shamed and he's publicly penitent. He's like, yeah, my bad. Sorry. I'm making it up to you. And similarly, David is publicly shamed by the prophet Nathan in his for what he did to Bathsheba and to the house of Uriah, and part of Nathan's response to David, he literally says, "What you did in secret, I'm going to do publicly in front of the whole world to see." So David was also publicly shamed, but then was, publicly penitent. So I think I don't know which way this goes, but I think it could go both ways. But in the end, what we're left with here, sharing my screen, in the end, what we're left with here is just a wild, really neat story. I think this helps to show that when we're dealing with the book of Genesis, when we're dealing with the Torah, we shouldn't be reading it as literature about the Bronze Age. We should be reading this in connection to what's going on in Israel during the monarchy. And here's a clear example of a text that obviously has, the succession within the household of David in view, as it, and turns it into this parable, really,
or even an explanation for why the monarchy didn't last, or whatever. This could be utilized, even if this is written after. A few things, and then I want to get to some super chats and have anyone who has questions ask. But the first thing I wanted to mention that I think is interesting, you kind of, when you find a certain key when you're looking into scripture, you kind of wonder, okay, does this possibly work itself in other areas? And I thought about when Abraham and his sons were traveling and they bump into another tribe. I cannot remember the name of the tribe. It's in Genesis, where they are, getting along with them just fine. And then the son rapes the sister of the sons of Abraham, or the daughter of Abraham. And here is this unification where Abraham, once again, there's a threat to his power. Okay. And here he is in a way.
Is this the rape of Dinah?
That sounds like her name.
Thinking of by Shechem?
I don't remember the names, but yeah, I think it may be where the brothers are so angry and Abraham says, yes. Listen, so
this is the rape of Dinah by Shechem. And so these are the sons of Jacob.
Right.
And of course,
sons of Jacob. Okay, I'm thinking Abraham. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So it's important to note here the names, the sons of Jacob, these are the 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shechem is the name of the capital city of the Northern Kingdom.
See, this is I mean, come on.
None of this is accidental. No. So, and quite often, like I've mentioned, throughout the Bible, and throughout the Bible, the Northern Kingdom is referred to either as Israel or as Ephraim. Within contemporary literature, like outside the Bible, third-party literature, I believe that the Northern Kingdom is very, very frequently, if not always, referred to as the Kingdom of Shechem.
Wow. So this obviously plays into this exact theme of control power. They're obviously going to circumcise, and when they're having their fever on the third or fourth day, I can't remember, the sons of Jacob go in and literally murder all the people. And it makes me think of the same power struggle theme that's happening in what you just described. I don't know why, but I guess when you see this sexual issue taking place, that'll red flag. Is this a narrative playing a doublet, a triplet, or is this somehow trying to reflect on this idea that you were describing? And I guess it might be.
I'm going to suggest here that when it comes to sex in the Bible, our primary reading of it should not be within this – 'cause, 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 'c
Kipp?
Damn
I think
it.
we lost.
Hello?
You're back now. You're back now.
Okay. All right. What was I saying?
You said your primary reading shouldn't be, and then you stopped.
Within this very post-Enlightenment romantic view of coupling that we have now. I mean, certainly that was there within the ancient world, and there are definitely examples of that, right? I mean, the Song of Solomon is all about romantic coupling, or mostly about romantic coupling. But I would say that primarily when it comes to sex in the Bible, this is all about power, economics, political strength, virility. Like, these are the features that we should be focusing on within the text.
I'll say one more thing that I think is interesting. Just throwing it out there. Recent interview was done with Bart Ehrman and Johanna Janes, who also was like an affiliate to promoting what Bart's doing. And the topic of Romans chapter 1 with Paul and homosexuality being mentioned. Bart said the reason this was a sin, and he's taking in the whole picture of the milieu or the zeitgeist of the situation, is that a man shouldn't be dominated. That it's this idea that you're talking about when you go way back in time, that they're the submissive one, they're taking it, that kind of thing. According to the way the culture was working, that was the sin. It wasn't necessarily what hole are you using or whatever. Okay, we're getting deep into this conversation. My point is that this gets into this idea of being able to dominate and who's in control. A power issue is what made this a sin, according to what Bart was saying. Don't know how true it is. No expert in this area. Just throwing it out there. It makes me think, wow, we're really thinking anachronistically. Like, that deed is what's bad, but rather it's a power issue, I think, that he's saying. So anyway.
Yeah, I would agree. And I don't think that's all of it, but I definitely think it plays a part.
Right.
And one of the reasons why that power dynamic is so important is because, and why it's expressed through sex, is because this is the way that you protect your family, and you secure the longevity of your family through progeny, through inheritance, through offspring. And you have to have sex to have children. That's all this stuff kind of works together like that, right?
Now, I know most people think birds bring babies, but listen, I'm telling you, it happens a different way. No, you bring up the God and Anatomy book that I love talking about so much, because all these euphemisms and problems my friend Stephen talked about in the Greek world. A man lost his virginity when he got in battle. He could take a woman's
pierced in battle,
or at least injured in some sense in battle. So it's really interesting how power and strength and combat and warfare and all this stuff plays it ties into sex. All right, super chats, here we go.
Awesome.
Jason Sobek, Lord of the Four Corners, thank you for the super sticker, my friend. I don't think you're here now, and we're giving you a shout out. So he said he had to leave earlier. It's okay, he had to leave.
I'm sorry.
I really appreciate you, my friend. Indo, thank you for the super chat, the support. Anyone who wants to ask questions, feel free to super chat. He says, God killed Onan because he didn't want to have kids like God commanded. He disobeyed. But also, what about There was no other reason given. Right. Could this be a metaphoric or be metaphoric?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I think we just spent like over an hour
explaining why God
filling in explaining all this. But I will say, like, one thing Air is maybe one of the reasons why Air is such a footnote in the text is because the son, the first son of David and Bathsheba, was an infant and died, and basically served no other purpose within the text other than as a symbol, right, of God's anger and his displeasure and his vengeance.
Indo, I hope you got that answer during the show. No, it's a lot of information. S-Duck, thank you for this.
One other thing I think it's important to point out here, which I think is possibly relevant as well. So the name Air, it's a derivative from the word air. It's most suggest it comes from the verb ara. The word city or fortress is derived from air. It's suggested that it means protector. So I mean, think about that too within this whole larger theme of a man's duty is to provide and protect his family. So air was just like wiped out, and maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe that's part of the explanation here, that the protection offered by David was so vapid and so so fleeting.
Thank you so much for the super sticker, S-Duck. I do not. Oh, he says no singing. No. Thank you so much, because you remember you said you weren't going to be singing in this episode. Doc Pleroma Not, thank you for the 10. I really appreciate it. Wasted seed seems to be limited to the redactoral strata of the Babylonian Talmud as assuming special powers. Is this due to differing assumptions? Ari Seaman versus their Palestinian counterparts?
I wish I knew more about what was going on here. My apologies to Doc Pleroma Not for not knowing anything about the wasted seed motif in the Babylonian Talmud. Differing assumptions, Seaman versus their Palestinian counterpart.
And wouldn't it be much later too, though? Wouldn't that be a bit later?
Oh, sure, but I think there's probably something. I mean, I'm sure there's a very, very interesting question in there somewhere. I'm not smart enough. I'm sorry to know what it is.
Okay. It's better to not give a answer than to give something that's BS. So, Melody Joy, thank you for the support. Good to see you back, Dr. Kill.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Constellation Pegasus. Really appreciate the support. I always enjoy it. Is it just me that worshiping God in the Old Testament is like making a deal with the mafia? Doesn't take much to piss someone off and get killed off real quickly, like a New York Minute.
I think that's it's mafia justice is very, very ancient, and was much more legitimate a long time ago than it turned out to be. So but yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think too, I mean, I hope one of the things I hope this does is to sort of show how there is a strong apologetic at work for the rule of David, when in reality, he was probably a big dickhead.
That's what Joel Baden says in his book on David. He's been. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the lengths that the writers in the Deuteronomistic history, and then even more so by the chronicler, to sanitize the rule of David and to rehabilitate this guy are extreme.
So if you're wanting to find a contradiction or a problem in the narrative that seems by the chronicler to be an embarrassment, you may want to go and read Samuel first, Kings first, and then get over to Chronicles and find out this does not look at all like that. And that's, I think, what Joel Baden was saying when he was asked the question, do you think there was probably a historical David? He thinks so. And the reason he thinks so is the embarrassment. He thinks it's so embarrassing that he's like, why would you make this guy who literally over and over and over fails? I mean, he has some successes, but it's like, Like anyone has some successes. He's just a guy who made a lot of problems and mistakes and things like that. But then they whitewash him. Well, why would they do that unless there was probably a guy at the basis?
Totally agree. Yeah. It's sort of the way I treat David mythicism very much the same way I treat Jesus mythicism. The lengths to which the writers go to explain or to rehabilitate so many of the features of both of these figures is a strong testament to their existence.
Our good friend Francesca thinks probably not, but she doesn't say
probably not, David.
Probably not.
Wow.
I'd like to know her reasoning behind that.
But, me too.
See what.
And you know what? I mean, I'm a sucker too, right? Like, I desperately hope there was an historical David, just because these stories are so amazing. And I have no doubt that has just obliterated my scholarly objectivity. Right.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't either way. For me, I'm really just trying to go wherever seems to make the most sense to me, and him being whitewashed so much just makes me go that way. So.
Come on.
Yeah. Neophyte One, thank you for the support, my friend. Good to see you here. Dr. Davis, I've been reading a lot on Jewish binitarianism. Would you agree the Dead Sea Scrolls reflect this type of theology more so than absolute monotheism?
Absolute monotheism. Yeah, I think that's yeah. You can make a case for that. Something that we definitely see throughout the scrolls is this strong focus on a I guess cosmic figures, right? Which I think lends to this or leads into it. And I will confess I'm also not I'm not as up to date as I should be. I'm not as well versed as I should be in Jewish binitarianism, but I think he's probably onto something there. You can certainly see it in the scrolls.
Thank you, Neophyte. Thank you for the support. Okay, so my wife just called me. I want you to answer this. I'll read it real quick. She said we got a hornet in the house. That's what she was trying to call me about earlier. And I'm like, I'm not alive. She's like, I'm afraid to leave the room. So before I get all my duties stripped of me and I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I need to go in there and defend the woman. No. Scott Duke, thank you for the support. Could you please share your thoughts about the discovery of the Mount Ebla?
Ebla. You want me to talk about this while you go kill?
Just real quick, I go kill the enemy.
All right.
Bring back its foreskin. Show you that I've doubled the amount of foreskin. All that good stuff. I'll be right back.
All right. Derek better come back with 10,000 foreskins. It was 10,000, wasn't it? So, can you please share your thoughts about the discovery of the Mount Ebla curse inscription recently announced? Is it being overhyped? I'm pretty happy that you asked this question today, Scott. I haven't followed it really, really closely, but I have stayed abreast of what's going on a little bit. So, and of course, one of the problems here is the fact that nobody's seen it yet. Scholars have not had a chance to take a look at the photographs of the inscription itself. So all we have to go on right now are the claims made by the archaeologists who made the discovery. So what I will say, I think there. So I'll put this discovery into a couple of different contexts. I think it's hugely important. It's hugely important from the perspective of Hebrew language, because this is yet another text, a very, very early text from, I believe it's the 12th century BCE, a clear example of Hebrew writing from the 12th century BCE. Now, bear in mind when I say Hebrew writing, I'm talking about a Canaanite pictographic script here. So Is it Hebrew? Is it Ugaritic? Is it, so it's, it's not like, bam, this is the biblical language here. There is some discussion and some debate as to the relationship between, these very early this very, very early primitive form of the language and what takes place afterwards. It's neat. I call it a pictographic text because, as I understand it, it preserves a form of the language which is still letters. Ancient letters were formed originally from pictographs. So, for example, I believe the letter Aleph was originally a picture of a bull, and the letter Bet was originally like a picture of a house, I think. So apparently that's what's on the inscription, and that's the kind of text that it is. That it's sort of it's this kind of language. And I think that's cool as hell. I think that's amazing. I also think it's amazing that it's a curse inscription. Now, a caveat on that, and I'm going to recommend that if for what I think is a pretty balanced appraisal from someone who knows what he's doing, please go check out Christopher Rolston's blog. He wrote about it recently. He's an expert epigrapher, and he's an acquaintance of mine who I really like. He and I have done some work together before on the Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries. So go and check out what he has to say about it. And I think he's on point by noting that there is definitely some dispute about what's going on here in terms of what the text is itself, right? I mean, we don't even know if this is a curse inscription. But having said all that, if it is a curse inscription, if it was found on Mount Ebla, I have a couple of other thoughts here. I think what this shows us is that there is a cursing tradition of some sort already connected to this mountain. And I think this helps to show that in the book of Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua, they're drawing on this pre-existing curse tradition and turning it into something more theologically appropriate, more nationalistically appropriate within the worship of Yahweh. I also think that this is potentially problematic for those who hold to ideas about inerrancy and about the perfect preserved text of Scripture, because in the book of Deuteronomy, it's in the book of Joshua, when Joshua rehearses the curses again at Mount Ebla, we're told that he said all of the curses and that there were none, and he didn't add anything to the curses originally of Moses. And what we have in the curse inscription is something that does not match the biblical text at all. All we have is just curses. Curse, 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 Yahweh, curse. I think I think that hurts this idea that, the Torah is just this perfect preservation of all the text, these very ancient textual traditions. And I think it's also kind of exciting because it shows us too the ways in which these theological developments took place much, much later. So I'll just repeat, go and check out Christopher Rolston's blog on this. He does a very good job assessing
it's like when Ronald Hindle talks about how they discovered abandoned massive cities that were built with enormous stones. And what did they do? They said that giants built them. Why? Because they themselves, these nomadic people, couldn't imagine men making a city that large. It had to be enormous men, giants. And so the imagination kind of kicks in there. Well, I mean, that's probably a bad analogy. The different analogy is, here's an existing tradition. There's something there. And boom, now you have text that later kind of say, hey, this goes way back. This is back there what Joshua is, rather than what he's trying to do, Dr. Stripling. And I plan on having academics who oppose this once we have the peer-reviewed literature come out saying everything they can about what was discovered. He's trying to equate this as evidence that Joshua had the whole text of Moses, and that there was this language was already outside of being hieroglyphics. So it's in this transition stage where you could actually write text instead of writing massive books in hieroglyphics to try and get the point across. So there's a lot there that he's stretching, I think, to try and make this fit the time. And it's better to say this is anachronistic, that there was already an existing tradition of curse, blah, 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 and then they write it down.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And I'll repeat here, and it's really important. No one's seen it yet. And until this is published, and until scholars get an opportunity to actually look at what's there, I mean, you can't really make the kinds of claims that he's or draw the connections he is until he's had a chance to have this critically reviewed. I don't think.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that, Kipp. Klaus, you have been forgiven, my friend. They were asking about spilling seed on the ground, if God was going to kill them. And I said, here, you can pay for indulgences.
No, man.
And he says, now he's feeling relieved.
You're good.
So you're good to go.
Spill your seed all over the place. So, and I think I would say, so I know, like, I mean, when I was, this was the go-to text, right? About not masturbating.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In church, you can't do it because look what God did to Onan for masturbating. And I really don't think it was like, oh, masturbating. I don't think it was like that at all. As I said, this is all connected to heir, the inheritance, the securing of an heir, the provision of property and security for your family. So I have no doubt that the Hebrews, they masturbated all the time happily and guilt free. So
thank you so much for that. Sovereign Soul, thank you for the super chat, my friend. How does all this violation politics work in conjunction with the fine imposed for such acts in Exodus? I always thought the Bible was saying Absalom was excessive in murdering Amnon.
Now, so I mean, certainly there's a lot of the problem with looking at a text like this and with looking at text in general within the Hebrew Bible is that you've got all these, there's multiple voices working here, right? So yeah, there's definitely an internal critique of exactly what's taking place in David's household. And yeah, Exodus does legislate against this kind of stuff, but when and under what circumstances? And I would suggest to you that, if there was an historical David, if there was an historical, house of David, if these stories in any way reflect what was occurring at the time, they sure as hell didn't have the Torah. And they sure as hell did not have the legal code, which condemned a lot of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, all this to say, yeah, there's a lot of mixed messages throughout the Bible, and the reason for that is because there's all sorts of different viewpoints that didn't all quite make it through the sanitization process.
Thank you for that large super chat and the support, Sovereign Soul. Good question. Constellation Pegasus, you're back. Thank you for the super chat. Why was God not killing people as the story unfolded? Hard for me to keep up with all of this. It's an interesting point, because if it was a complete fiction, right? Let's play that again. If this was a complete fiction, you would imagine he'd have struck people dead at every moment, every turn,
Right. So if we're talking about the succession narrative here, right? Like and maybe that's another point in favor of an historical kernel behind this. I like that, Derek.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's something, because when you started describing this is what was interesting. Constellation Pegasus was writing in the chat. I try to keep eyes on everything and still keep up.
It's hard to do.
It is. I've been learning to multitask. My wife's way better at it than me. But
women are, apparently. It's
seriously,
it's like a biological thing.
It's interesting, but Constellation brought up an interesting point of like how different it is to think in these terms than what we do today. We're so far removed in many ways to what's going on then. And that's what made me like kind of think about this, like, this is hard to keep up with. Finally, you started putting pieces together eventually, and it all started adding up, and it was more clear. But at first, I was like,
yeah,
it's hard.
Oh, I know, eh? Yeah, it's very, very complex, and it really takes some time just sifting through the texts and poring over them, and yeah, I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
Sorry. Eminem just spilled his seed a half hour ago.
What?
I'm just looking at the chat. Eminem says, I just spilled my seed a half hour ago.
Oh my gosh.
You go, man. Way to go.
There you go. Damn Bigfoot. Thank you for the super chat. Does Kipp believe Aesop's fables are more moral?
I assume more moral than the Hebrew Bible?
Right.
No, yeah. I mean, the Hebrew Bible is vast, and it's not so it's not so theme oriented and singular in its message, right? So I would say, I mean, yeah, I think Aesop's fables are probably, or definitely, much more practical than almost all of the Hebrew Bible texts. I mean, there's some, there's within the instruction and the wisdom literature itself, and this is what these are texts with the intention of teaching, of moral teaching. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but yeah, so much of it is culturally irrelevant and outdated, and I will say too, I think when I teach the Hebrew prophets, it's always in this context of social criticism as well. One of the things that maybe the primary thing that the prophets were doing were censuring the monarchy and censuring the people in power for their abuses of it, and I think that's all very laudable,
especially in the time and place, etc. So
absolutely,
yeah, we're way past the morals of the biblical narrative. We should be, at least. Ken Scaletta, thank you for the super chat. Good to see you. I always recognize, I think is that a rabbit's eye? I always think of it as a rabbit's eye. I don't know why.
Oh,
anyway, I'm looking close. It's hard to tell.
Kind of is.
Hello, Dr. Kipp. I have a Qumran question. Is the Danielic Son of Man discussed in the Qumran literature? And if so, how is it interpreted?
So the it's so not at length, and there's a couple of texts that are possibly interpretations or developments of the Son of Man tradition. I think the most probably the most obvious one is the 11Q13, otherwise known as Melchizedek. And as is typical within the Qumran text, there definitely seems to be a focus on a cosmic figure who's going to come in, break through, and really suss things out in the last days. So and that tends to be offhand. I have to go back and look, but just drawing off the top of my head, I believe this is sort of the direction the Qumran texts go when they are dealing with Daniel. I think it's 11 and 12, isn't it?
I think so. I'd have to go back and look and make sure, but it's definitely in the latter chapters.
I just noticed too that somebody has pointed out that masturbation is definitely dealt with in Leviticus. Yep, that's true. And again, what we're dealing with here is a matter of when So like this is, and who too, like people also have to understand that when it comes to the biblical literature and the laws and the stories and stuff, the people who are like the real people who are, you know, living in the countryside and looking after their farms and providing for their own families and stuff, they're not reading anything. They're probably not even worshiping Yahweh, and if they are worshiping Yahweh, they're worshiping Yahweh in conjunction with all these other gods. They have no interest really in what's going on in the temple or in the palace, insofar as you know, up to the point where it starts to concern them, which is almost never. So really, nobody knows about this. You know, these texts in Leviticus are written by priests for priests, and you know, kings and princes and people who are you know, living in the you know, the upper echelon of Jerusalem society.
Thank you for that. ScholarVid, is the Telden Stili the only evidence for David outside the Bible? How confident are you about the historicity of David, and why?
So, yes, it is the only evidence for David outside the Bible, and it's important to point out here that it is not direct evidence for the existence of a person, David. It is the existence of a Davidic dynasty, so a house of David, a lineage of David. So, how confident am I in the historicity of David?
Put a number on it, maybe.
Yeah, I hate doing that, and I don't want to. But I would say, you know, I'm fairly confident. I don't like that either. So
if you were to put a number that can change,
so
like 80%,
you know, 70,
okay,
65, 70, you know, is feels like a nice safe number here, and and it's
it feels nice.
I've talked a little bit about this already. The reasons why my confidence in the historicity of David, the reasons why I hold to the historicity of David are because, again, the apologetic lengths to which the Bible authors are going to sanitize the life and rule of David. It's this messy stuff that appears in the succession narrative. It's these critiques that you can pick up elsewhere throughout, like in Genesis 38 that we just looked at, and maybe most importantly, because, you know, if there was an historical David, like, my God, what an interesting person this must have been. And I'm absolutely fascinated by the possibilities of what real life looked like under a King David.
That makes me also wonder, you know, what makes me really curious, if there was a guy at the bottom of the barrel here, and that this guy had some ugly stuff documented about him, how much more ugly stuff do we not know that actually happened?
Oh, yeah. Like no question.
This gets into kind of speculative land, but it makes you wonder, okay, if David was king and Saul somehow gets taken down, and we say it's because God saw him as not fit, is there really something else that's going on? Did David do something to steal the throne? And in what way did he do this? And like, not that, oh, God honored him and knew that he was a righteous man, was going to give him the throne, or like,
I mean, I will just say this, in, you know, and building on the theme, one of the very, very important things that David does to secure his own claim to Saul's throne is to marry Michal, the daughter of Saul. So, I mean, you know, all this, I would say, I mean, forget about the Bible stuff. I mean, if there was a historical David, and if there was an historical Saul, the transition of power had everything to do with the politics of the day, and with the economics, and with the public perception of each of these figures. So there's nothing miraculous or divine about this. It's bloodthirsty Game of Thrones kind of shit.
Thank you for that. Constellation Pegasus, where was God at with all of drama going on?
Got his bucket of popcorn, and he was just sitting there, very much like. In fact, I think probably very. If you can picture, if there was an actual Yahweh and he was an actual guy and was involved, he probably looked and sounded and ate popcorn very much like Dr. David A. Falk.
Oh my gosh, your trip. Bradford Baldwin, thank you for the 15. Appreciate the super chat. Are there any precursors to Old Testament scriptures that describe spilling seed as bad or sinful? Ugaritic text, other Near Eastern cultures?
Somebody needs to get Dr. Josh on the phone.
I'm going to do this on camera.
Are you?
I am about to call. I am going to call him.
And just say, hey, Josh, it's Derek, Kipp here. We got a question for you. Just do it like that, right?
He won't be able to hear you, though. He won't be able to hear you. That's the only problem.
No, but that's why. Just tell him I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Let's see what happens.
This is the phone a friend portion of Millionaire. Maybe I'll call back though before we're done.
You know who might know though? Megan might know. She might.
Megan might know. You could call her.
I'm calling her now.
All right.
Hey, Derek.
Hey, you're live.
Sure
you're live, and I'm on with Kipp, and I just have a
tell her
question.
that.
You may not have the answer to.
Love your hair, Megan.
Okay.
Okay.
Kipp said he loves your hair, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Kipp.
Absolutely. So, okay, the question goes like this. We were talking about this story in Genesis 38 about spilling seed, and Onan, gets killed, and Judah's the one who sneaks in with his daughter-in-law, which turns into, I guess, does he end up marrying her?
She knows the story. You don't have to.
You know the story.
Fine.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Someone asked, are there any precursors to Old Testament scriptures that describe spilling seed as bad or sinful? Ugaritic text or other Near Eastern cultures? Is there anything like that you're aware of? I tried to call Josh, but I know he's probably at work.
No, he's at work. Not that I know of, so I'm not the best person to ask for Ugaritic, but as far as I'm aware, no, and there's nothing Mesopotamian springing to mind. You have, like, the gods ejaculating and creating rivers and...
They're going all over the place, aren't they?
Gods and stuff, but nothing is, like, a negative.
So everything's a positive.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
It's all good.
Interesting. Well, I guess everybody keep doing what you're doing. Thank you,
Thanks, Megan.
Oh, you're welcome.
Kipp said thank you. All right, bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
She's awesome.
Well,
there
you go, Bradford.
If Marduk doesn't say it's a sin, then it's not a sin. All right, thank you so much for that, Bradford.
The gods got progressively more anal retentive and prudish as time transpired. To the point where we live in this sad world today.
Constellation Pegasus, thank you again, my friend, for the support. Last thought. This story seems equal as the flat earth and dome cosmology. This is simply outrageous to me. My head is racing at all of this.
I hope that's a good thing. I don't know.
I mean,
did I break Constellation Pegasus?
I don't know. I don't think
I
so.
didn't break you, man.
No, I think this is Constellation's way of saying, like, yes, bring more of this kind of stuff, because we hear, would you ever hear this told like this ever at church? I mean, would any Christian,
if you heard this told at church, you probably, maybe churches should start doing this. Like, who wouldn't want to go to church to hear about this?
I mean,
I'd go.
But doesn't this bring an embarrassment on the seed of David idea? I mean, to me, it just seems like
it could,
you know
right?
what I mean?
Like I said, there's a couple different ways you can go. And yeah, it certainly could. But yeah, it's
especially Jesus, this tying this, oh, we got to have our father be David. Hallelujah. Like, whoo, you sure you want that? I don't know. But thank you, Constellation. I'm with you. Halfway through this, I was broken. I got super glue and tape. I was putting myself back together again, just enough to keep up with Kipp here. Doc Pluralmanat is back. What are your thoughts on the neo-documentary hypothesis, particularly stylistic and terminological markers now replacing plot and narrative continuity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of a lot of that stuff. And that's when it's had an impact on the way I read text generally. You know, when I'm looking at ancient texts and finding parallels, so many of them you discover through formulas, formulaic language and rhetorical devices and these sorts of things, and it's pretty it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, I think it's great.
Thank you, Doc. Really appreciate that. Let me see. Aramgard. Our last super chat here is Aramgard, and he says, thoughts on the idea that the book of Samuel preserves historical truth about David because it contains so much negativity, acts as an apologetic.
Like I would say, I mean, we've been talking quite a bit about this. I would say that the so-called negative portrayal of David throughout the book of Samuel, which is part of the Deuteronomistic history, is not it's not like it's not like a criterion of embarrassment sort of situation where, oh, it has to be true because look how terrible he looks in this. I would actually say this is the result of you know, the rehabilitation. Like it was so bad that this was the best they could do. And I would say that again, I think the argument for historicity sort of plays into this idea that it was just that hard to make this guy look any good.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
so sorry. I wanted, if I can, yeah, maybe finish if you have something to say about this, but there's something else I wanted to, that I've seen a few times in the chat here that I wanted to chime in on.
Well, I just was going to simply say, obviously, Constellation Pegasus said more verification of why I'm an atheist now. And then Merlin X, just the comment, thank you for noticing this, Derek. If David is not a great guy, why is his seed so blessed? You know, it kind of gets you thinking about this. Like, what the heck?
Oh, yeah.
Why are we tying it into this guy? And if he was just invented, I could see why they would want to do the apologetics to have him be a descendant of David. If he really was the king of a people that goes far enough back, they're kind of screwed and stuck with the person that they're stuck with. So
and
now
it's a really annoying. The sanitized David is really kind of an annoying figure. Like, you know, he's just trying so hard to do what Yahweh wants. He's trying so hard because he loves Yahweh so much. He's, you know, he's just all about Yahweh, and sometimes when he tries, it's oops, I made a mistake, and but I love Yahweh so much. He'll forgive me. He'll take it back because Yahweh loves him so much. I mean that's just lame. I'm sorry, but that's lame. Like, you know, nobody deserves forgiveness for the kinds of things that this guy does. And this does play into, so one thing I wanted to mention, I saw a couple of chats. I'm not sure if it was from the same guy, but at least one person was really pushing back hard on my description of David's encounter with Bathsheba's rape. And what I will say is that in the story, in reality, she has absolutely no agency. So what else are you going to call that? She is a woman who is put into a position where she has to have sex with a man and cannot refuse because of who he is and because of who he is. That's rape. Like I don't care what other kind of conditions go into this, whether if she feel pressured to do it, that's still rape. Like how else are you going to describe this? Am I wrong about this?
It's like, you want to eat next week? You want to eat? Okay. Then willingly sleep with me and I'll make sure you're fed. Oh, you won't? Let me keep convincing you until you do. Okay. You'll eat next week now. Thank you. I mean, like, you're kind of, no matter what, there is the pressure here. And I suspect if you look at the story, she's not like, oh, David, I've been waiting. I saw you in the corner of my eye. You watched me from the balcony. Oh, thank you for coming down here. Here, slip it in. No, like, it's obviously
something else to say here too. Like, so, a couple things. No, in the first place, people misconstrue what's happening because David sees her bathing on a rooftop. People misconstrue this as her being promiscuous or somehow, doing something that she shouldn't be doing, and that can't be further from the truth. Within the culture, the expectation is that David should not be at home. The king's house is the only house from which you can look down and see what's going on the rooftops of other people's homes. The rooftop in an Israeli house is a place of privacy. It's a place of modesty. This is not a place to expect people to be seeing you or looking at you. So David is not supposed to be at home. Remember, there's a war going on. He's fighting a war with Ehrman. He needs to be out fighting the war with Ehrman, and he's not. So she has no expectation that that anybody is going to see her there. So there's that. Was there something else I was going to say there? And the other thing too, when you read the story and she comes to see him, like when it says he sends for her and she comes into his house, and the text makes a point of noting that she is modestly dressed and in her presentation before him. So this is not the way that you will describe
a willing
an affair.
A woman who's wanting him.
Yeah. And finally, let's also remember that the text obviously doesn't say David raped Bathsheba in those words. And the reason it doesn't is because it is doing everything it can to rehabilitate this figure. I'm treating this story and I'm treating these texts for this stream as if there's an historical kernel here. So, and that historical kernel, from everything I see within the text, and also it's the story of the rape of Tamar is also part of this criticism of David and his behavior with Bathsheba. And so in my treatment of this story, the historical kernel to me, or a part of it, is the fact that David raped Bathsheba.
Yeah, it keeps echoing this idea for sure. I think it's funny how Judah is just trucking along and it's totally okay. Hey, hold on. You're a sex worker? Oh, cool. Come on. Like totally nonchalant. Of course, in the ancient world, I suspect that was typical and normal. But
I mean, this was. Here's another one. The Israelite. Remember the story of the Israelite spies who Joshua dispatched to spy on the city of Jericho. They went to go see the harlot Rahab.
Yeah.
Do you think they were there to, visit or to maybe to play games, or maybe to learn some of the local Canaanite customs. Come on. They were going to visit a prostitute.
Right.
And, you know, even though there's the text, you know, in a roundabout way kind of censures this sort of behavior, there's also this, I think there's this expectation that this is going to happen. And it's, oh, this is what men do, right?
Wow. We got one more here, and then I got to let you go. Jake 4D, thank you for the super chat. Is it possible it's the other way around? Instead of trying to make David, a bad David look good, could it be trying to make a really good David look bad?
Like, you know, I find that, well, I would say no, because if the text was trying to make a really good David look bad, then his line would not have survived through Solomon up to Josiah, who's really the great hero of the documentary, or sorry, of the Deuteronomistic history. So I would say, yeah, I just don't think so.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all your support.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, go check us out on the Patreon. Help support us if you would. I would greatly appreciate the support. I work very hard to bring you early content, hundreds of videos. He also has a project he's working on. It is in the description. And he has the YouTube channel. Go hit that bell and hit all after you subscribe, so you're notified every time Dr. Kill is bringing the blade. Any final words from you?
No, but maybe I should sort of say something about. So I've been kind of absent from YouTube for a while, and lots of that I've just gotten really, really busy. And I'm going to be really busy, unfortunately, for I think at least until the fall. A couple of my commitments will carry me through till then and occupy almost all of my time. I was happy to do this today, and it was super fun, but I just, people, I'm sorry for, I mean, there's not going to be much content on there's not going to be any new content on my channel for some time, and I apologize for that. But yeah, things are kind of out of my control right now, and I got some stuff that I gotta take care of. But I really, really hope that by the fall I'll be able to start making videos again on a more consistent basis.
Well, we do have the debate coming up. You will be appearing.
Oh,
that.
Yeah, right.
So
that'll be good.
Yes, there is a debate,
and
on Isaiah.
I'm very excited for everyone to get to meet my debate partner and my very good friend, Matthew P. Monger, who has been a partner in crime of mine for a lot of years, in particular when I was working in Norway. So I'm super, super excited to get him on and to have people get to meet him.
I gotta show everybody that should be up in my lives. Oh, that's past live streams. Yeah, I want to show upcoming ones. All right, so here we go. Let me share my screen so everybody could see. Okay, so on my page, when you go to my channel, you see these are lives. Tonight, there's going to be a live on a Mormon apologist. What ended up happening for them to realize that it's not true. But who wrote Isaiah? So Dr. Kipp will be on with his friend, and Jonathan Sheffield will be on with some girl. I don't remember her name right now because I've been so busy doing everything on planet Earth. But one is saying that Isaiah is written by a single author, and Dr. Kill is saying no.
Correct.
So yeah, if you go there, this is the thumbnail. You can go ahead and like the video. You can comment down below. You can argue and debate with people for the next 2 weeks or 11 days.
And
sorry.
should I sell this like the Ehrman Lacona debate? This is going to be the Isaiah authorship debate to end all Isaiah authorship debates.
This is actually, fun fact, your first actual formal debate, but with friendly people. So it'll be a fun one to see happen.
Yeah, it's good of everyone to to be nice to me. So
yeah,
I'm really kind of terrified and expect it to go very poorly. But please show up.
Yeah, please come watch. We'll whitewash it later and make sure that it was better than it was. Sure. Everybody will be totally happy. But seriously, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Seriously, Kipp, your time. Hopefully I can harass you enough for you to come on periodically just to show us you're alive and that Dr. Kill wasn't killed. That's my hope.
Still killing.
Stay tuned for the special intro, outro that I made for Dr. Kipp. Go support him. Go support us. If you like what you heard today, you want to learn more and see more, keep MythVision alive. Those super chats, the support on Patreon. You can one time through different apps that are available out there if you want to help me out. But other than that, never forget, we are MythVision. Wrong one. This is the right one.
Back in Washington, Kipp Davis is getting his first look at a final prized fragment in the Museum of the Bible's collection.
This is a fragment that contains text from Genesis chapter 32, and it's supposedly from the 1st century BC or the 1st century CE.